So I'm outside for most of this video, mostly because I ran out of space to film in my actual house, but also because I think that this game is just special. Not necessarily special because it's innovative and huge and the big new thing, but special because it's just really, really good. If you want the skinny, Shut Up and Sit Down absolutely recommends Renature. It's a simply complex stroke of masterful design that's as cozy as it is mean and gorgeous as it is traditional. 10 out of 10, we recommend, smells a bit like a classic. Thing is, I'd like to get a bit whimsical about this box, if that's okay. I ask your permission because so far at my time at Shut Up and Sit Down, I don't think I've reviewed anything particularly bombastically, in the sense that I've felt a little bit reserved about using this badge because it feels like I'm taking the special poker chip they keep behind the counter for only the most esteemed guests and putting it all on red. Only it's not my money that I'm betting, it's someone else's, and it's not a poker chip, it's a board game, and it's not a casino, it's a review with a man sitting in the woods on his own. And you don't stand to win any money, you just stand to win maybe like an okay time of an evening with your friends. I'm very aware that as a junior voice in this industry, an industry that is rife with passion and laced with history, that my voice isn't trustworthy yet. I mean, I've not played A Feast for Odin, I've not played Ra, I've not played Food Chain Magnate or Mage Knight. And what I'm getting at, I guess, is that most of Renature's rankings on BGG are a 6 or a 7. And even though Nimber over here gives it a 8 for game tactics, it only gets a 6 for makes me smile. I mean, how can you trust this board game boy when he says that this box is a complex stroke of purposeful design that's as cozy as it is mean and gorgeous as it is traditional? 10 out of 10, it really is very good. I would go as far as to say that it smells a bit like a classic. And I'd like to make a case for why you can trust me just this once, maybe. I think it's because Renature is a game that is so immediate in its design sensibilities that even people like me,
a mere pinball schlub,
should be able to see why it's a genius piece of design, even if they don't love it as much as I do. Every single person that I have played this game with thinks that it sits somewhere on a scale from damn nice to bloody well excellent. And I will break down exactly why in a little video called Renature Review now. The first rule of Renature is that it's dominoes. Place a domino in one of these grass spaces, and then everything else happens. Once you place a domino, you put a leafy little thing down in any adjacent field space to that domino. Anything you place will score a point, but it'll also score an extra point for anything that's smaller than it in that area. I like to think that's because the oak tree is shaking down the patches of turf for the lunch money, but other headcanons are available. Now, onto the exciting stuff. When an area is surrounded completely with dominoes, it will score. And to work out who scores what, you have to look at the total strength of shrubs in that area. Each one is worth a value from 1 to 4, with these big oaks being worth the most and the little turfs being worth the least. Whoever has the highest total score in that area will take the points for the area, the top of this little token. And whoever's second will take the smaller points on the token. If you're the only player in that area, you take both sets of points. And then whoever closed off that area takes the tile itself for doing so, netting them a neat endgame bonus. So the game is simple, but it's not that simple. Let's talk about some rubs. Firstly, the big one. In these areas, bigger is better until it isn't. You see, if two colours of pieces ever have an equal total value when it's scored, you score that area as if neither player has pieces there. And that's why everyone has these neutral pieces on their board, to slash the tyres of a player that's getting ahead of themselves using Mort Garson to steal your lunch money. That rule is the one that, to use a specialist term, makes people go ooh. The second rub is that each player starts with a smattering of these cloud tokens. They're worth a point at the end of the game, but they can also be spent during it to take a number of special actions. 2 clouds will let you change the Joker suit, which is whichever animal is considered wild for the purposes of domino placement. 3 will let you take another turn straight away, and between 1 and 4 will let you take that strength of corresponding piece from the board and put it back onto your player sheet. The game ends when everyone has used up all of their dominoes, and the person with the most points wins. And that's all of Renature. What is lovely about this rule set is that the depth of it clicks into place organically throughout the course of your first game without any real need for pointers, but there are enough little realizations and understandings that come out of those rules that will spill across the course of your first game and on into the next. Like when you realize that the winding, irregular shapes of these fields are deeply important in relation to the squat, oblong forms of your dominoes, allowing you to block off routes or lend opportunities to a future self or waiting opponent. When you realize that you can use the cloud power to grab an opponent's neutral piece back, so long as you've got the space. When you realize that starting with a full display means you've got to be using those powers from the get-go, and the few cloud actions you take are going to transform the way that the game shakes out. When you realize that each domino only appears once, so you can make impossible placements for your opponents unless they change the wild. Those realizations are the magic in the rules of Renature, but it never gets overwhelming. It always comes back to, I have to do dominoes. And why does it always circle back that way? Well, it's time to talk about a little thing I like to call the game feel. I think that Renature would be about half the game it is if it wasn't such an inviting box. There's a lovely piece of art on the front, a bit generic but inviting and generally warm. The title is curled, rounded, cozy. The manual is clean and Euro-y. The board is vibrant and clear, with these twee critters lining the top and on each and every single domino you're pulling from these cloth bags. The board is even wreathed in this distinctly grandma core sunflower pattern that's kind of garish and kind of gorgeous, and I kind of dig it a lot. And hey, check out the back of the board. It's so nice for something that doesn't even need to be there. Thing is, I don't really want to talk about Renature visually. I want to talk about it texturally. And that's true in the sense of tactility. Like, those little domino pieces are so satisfying to slide off the top of a stack and plop down in front of you. And that's nice. It feels stately, official, maybe a little bit ritualistic. And ruffling around in those cloth bags for pieces is also a lovely, chunky time. But what I really want to talk about is how, as you play the game, the board becomes itself a kind of visual texture. These dominoes aren't that thick, but they're thick enough and incongruous enough with the greens of the board that as they jut out, they reinforce that thematic connection of the river trickling down from the top of the board to the bottom. They change the actual landscape of what's in front of you. They show where the activity is. They focus attention. And more than that, they show that these green spaces are a slow-burning group project that's as much competition as it is collaboration. You collectively dictate where is important, you give each other opportunities. Each move is intriguing because you're all invested in where you're taking this route together. Because everyone has skin in the game, wherever the path twists and forks. And in between those paths, you have the plants themselves, vibrant chunks of wood with sizes that represent their relative importance, the bumpy patches of turf and shrubs cowering underneath the walloping verticality of the pine and the oak. The smaller plants barely peek above the surface, and the larger ones jut outwards and catch the eyes of exactly where and who might be important right now. Who has the biggest stake, and where you've got to take them down a peg. We've been known to talk about miniatures in games, these giant, wasteful hunks of plastic that only sometimes deserve to be giant, wasteful hunks of plastic. The old ones in Cthulhu Wars and the Queen in Nemesis are perfect examples of this point. They're both ludo-visual pieces whose size displays their relative importance within a game and thus are satisfying things as a result. The problem is, they still add bucks upon bucks to the respective costs of their games, and they push them from gently being cozily snugged up in Gamesville into the wild abandon of Toy Town. The thing is, in Renature, you get all the feelings of these miniatures, these massive, stupid miniatures, without a shred of plastic. The oak trees in Renature have the same satisfying whomp to them as any of the best miniatures in these other games. And I think that's because it was never about the sculpt or material or size of a miniature. It's about the presence and representation of power and the ease of that power's identification. But look, For all its thematic coherence and visual ease, I still think that Renature is a pretty fuzzy box. Those dominoes, the very core of the game, put a fluffiness around any sort of core strategy that you might come up with. And a thing that I wanted to raise here was that I played a game of Renature directly after one of Tigris and Euphrates, and I was surprised at how much the two actually ended up having in common. Not necessarily in their theme or individual mechanics, but the way that they approach fuzziness. Both of them have a mechanical nastiness that gets sliced away by just a little bit of fluff around the edges. I'm not saying that Tigris and Euphrates is a cozy game, but it undersells its own cutthroat mechanical horror with sprinklings of luck in the forms of combat, sometimes being determined by just pulling a load of tiles from behind your screen. And Renature has much the same system. You can agonize over every single placement of every single one of your dominoes, and just as easily as you do that, your opponent can take you and turn you onto your back like a strategic little turtle and watch your stupid legs pedal in the air. And that happens just as often as a play will score you an absolute shed load of points, because they've probably not got anything that's gonna mess you up. Or do they? And besides, you've only got a small number of dominoes that will only let you go in a vanishingly small number of spaces, especially if you've not got enough dominoes to let you change the wild. And that's to say that you could work out the probability of exactly what you might draw and when you might draw it and game it out like that, but the game isn't inviting you into that space, at least not for now. For now, you and your opponent will take turns making plays that will sometimes be fortunate and sometimes be unfortunate. The game is a race of pointed, jagged, barbed plays and myopic misplays, but you and your opponent will be enamored by the simple act of just playing it, the tactile feelings and the fuzziness around it, lauding a good play when it happens and cackling when one does not. I think that increasingly often ideas of great design are conflated with ideas of complexity, of grandiosity, of giant, endless, complex spaces. And maybe Renature is a little bit special because it doesn't do any of that. It's a game that chases the ideas, the true ideas of great design through the media of total fuzzy cozy. That's not to say that this game can't be bitey and mean and savage and complex when it wants to be. At 2, it is definitely that, and at 4, you can sometimes get the feeling of being rabid dogs fighting over what little territory remains. But it always comes back to the fuzzy core. These dominoes always invite that former mode of play, the simpler, tactile act of placing and being happy that you're doing it. This is a game that invites tradition, precision, replayability, and ease. And I think it all comes down to the fact that when you play Renature, it's easy to be satisfied when you win, but impossible to be salty when you lose. And that right there is the end of this week's instalment of the Shut Up and Sit Down show on youtube.com. If you enjoyed this video, there's plenty more out there to watch with your eyes and your ears, like Quinn's video on the search for Planet X. Again, we both enjoyed. It's like doing essays, but it's more fun. And outside of that, do what you will. Like, subscribe, have a nice day, generally enjoy yourself, stay calm, stay chill, and remember to always Renature. Bye!